Have you ever found yourself growing increasingly irritated by someone you once loved deeply? A partner, perhaps, who was once your best friend? But as the years have passed, you've started to feel more and more distant from them. If you're in a long-term marriage or relationship, you might have experienced this too, especially as time and circumstances change. But why does this happen? And how can we navigate these feelings? In today's video, we'll be diving into the surprising reasons why some women begin to resent their husbands as they get older. We'll discuss the emotional and practical struggles that lead to this shift and what can be done to overcome them. You'll hear real-life stories and gain valuable insights on preserving happiness in relationships during the later years of life. If you've ever wondered why these feelings arise, or if you're searching for ways to reconnect with your spouse, this video is for you. Have you ever thought about how these feelings of resentment build over time? As years pass, what may have once felt like small annoyances or challenges can grow into larger issues that affect emotional well-being. Let's explore what could be at the heart of these feelings. It starts with the subtle shift in roles over time. As life moves forward, responsibilities often accumulate on one partner's shoulders. Often, in marriages where there is an imbalance of household duties or child-rearing responsibilities, one partner may begin to feel taken for granted. This can especially happen when the spouse isn't aware or doesn't contribute equally. The emotional toll of carrying these burdens alone, managing the house, the finances, and taking on additional duties like caring for grandchildren, can lead to feelings of frustration and resentment. One story shared by a woman reveals how over the years, her relationship with her husband transformed into a source of constant frustration. She described how he had always been a rough man, never interested in helping with household chores or managing finances. Early in their marriage, he had handed over his paycheck to her, trusting her to manage their money. However, over the years, he continued to abdicate responsibility, leaving her to take care of everything at home. When their children became adults and had families of their own, she stepped in to care for their grandchildren. She provided this support out of compassion, hoping that her husband would notice her sacrifices and pitch in when she needed help. But instead of receiving the support she longed for, her husband remained indifferent, glued to his phone and uninterested in sharing the load. Despite her exhaustion and overwhelming responsibilities, he didn't lift a finger. Her frustration grew as she carried the weight of everything on her shoulders. She dreamed of having time for herself, of traveling, relaxing, and doing the things she loved. But that dream was dashed when her husband's health deteriorated and he became seriously ill due to his chronic smoking. This woman's experience is not uncommon. Many women, particularly those in long-term marriages, find themselves in a similar situation where they feel overwhelmed and underappreciated. Over the years, a lack of emotional or physical support from a spouse can lead to resentment. The feeling of being taken for granted can be compounded by a lack of acknowledgement from the partner, who might blame the wife for taking on too much responsibility or creating the problems herself. What's happening here is that the imbalance of power and responsibility within the relationship leads to emotional exhaustion. The partner who is left to do everything feels neglected and burdened, while the other partner remains detached, unaware of the strain on the relationship. It's crucial to acknowledge that these feelings of resentment are not about one isolated incident, but the accumulation of years of unmet needs, unspoken expectations, and growing emotional distance. As the resentment builds, the emotional distance between the partners can widen, leading to a breakdown in communication and intimacy. The partner who feels neglected or overburdened may begin to lose respect or affection for the other. This can create a vicious cycle where one partner feels increasingly unhappy but doesn't feel they can speak up without making the situation worse. One of the hardest challenges in this scenario is that, for many women, leaving isn't a simple solution, especially later in life, when years of marriage and shared responsibilities are at stake. Divorce can feel like an insurmountable option. For this woman, she struggled with the thought of leaving because of the stigma surrounding divorce, particularly at her age. The fear of judgment from friends, family, and even her children made the thought of breaking up seem impossible. Additionally, she worried about the impact on her children, who were successful in their careers and already dealing with the pressures of their own lives. The thought of causing them embarrassment or harming their professional reputations by having to deal with a divorce was too much for her to bear. In this case, despite feeling trapped in a life she didn't want, the woman felt unable to make the choice to leave due to the ripple effect it would have on her family's well-being. This fear of judgment and the weight of family expectations are significant factors that can make it difficult for some women to leave unfulfilling relationships. The societal pressure, especially in older age, to stay in a marriage despite growing unhappiness can be suffocating. Even when the emotional and physical toll becomes overwhelming, the perceived consequences of ending the relationship may feel too high. The key to navigating these feelings and preventing the resentment from completely eroding the relationship lies in communication and seeking support. Couples must recognize when their emotional needs are not being met and take steps to address them before the situation reaches a breaking point. For the woman in the story, the resentment grew because she had no outlet for her frustrations. Had she and her husband been able to have an open and honest conversation about their needs and expectations, they might have been able to address the imbalance before it caused irreparable harm to their bond. Another important aspect to consider is the role of self-care. When one partner feels neglected or overburdened, it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that their happiness depends solely on the other person. However, it's essential for both partners to nurture their individual well-being. This woman's story highlighted how she had devoted so much of her time and energy to caring for others that she had neglected her own dreams and aspirations. She felt trapped in a role that left no space for her to recharge and pursue her own interests. By prioritizing self-care and maintaining a sense of individuality, couples can prevent burnout and preserve their relationship. Ultimately, relationships require ongoing effort from both partners. The struggles that arise in long-term marriages, especially as life circumstances change, are common. However, by fostering open communication, showing appreciation for one another's contributions, and seeking support when needed, couples can navigate these challenges and find ways to reconnect. It's essential to acknowledge the emotional toll that unaddressed issues can have on the relationship and take proactive steps to preserve the bond, even as life circumstances evolve. If you've ever found yourself in a similar situation or are seeking ways to rebuild your relationship, it's never too late to take action. Small changes, such as having regular check-ins about your emotional needs, can make a significant difference. Understanding why feelings of resentment arise and taking steps to address them can help reignite the connection that may feel lost over time. Thank you for watching, and remember, taking care of your relationship and yourself is a journey that requires effort from both partners. The emotional and physical toll of managing a household alone can become unbearable. In the past, a wife may have been willing to endure her husband's faults, hoping things would improve over time. But as the years go by, the emotional reserves deplete, and the constant burden of responsibility starts to weigh heavily on her. This is especially true when the partner continues to show indifference to the needs and well-being of their spouse. For many women, the accumulation of these feelings begins when they find themselves shouldering most, if not all, of the household duties, such as managing finances, caring for children, and even supporting grandchildren. When a partner continues to disregard their contributions or refuses to share the load, resentment can slowly build. In this case, the woman's story illustrates how her husband's addiction to smoking and his complete disregard for his health and hygiene affected her mental, emotional, and physical well-being. His persistent smoking not only harmed his health, but also created an unhealthy environment for her, with the constant exposure to secondhand smoke. The more she asked him to quit, or at least try to improve his habits, the more his indifference grew and the harder it became to feel any connection to him. The emotional distance between them deepened as her husband's stubbornness and refusal to take responsibility for his health continued to make her feel trapped. His carelessness about his hygiene and smoking made it difficult for her to even be near him without feeling disgusted or physically ill. His failure to acknowledge her discomfort or do anything to alleviate it contributed to her growing resentment. The helplessness she felt, unable to convince him to change despite her constant pleas, made the emotional burden even heavier. As time went on, her frustration mounted. She felt as if she was trapped in a cycle of neglect, unable to escape from a situation that only seemed to worsen. This is a sentiment shared by many older women in long-term marriages, where the expectations they once had for a fulfilling partnership begin to unravel. The reality of living with a partner who is emotionally unavailable, indifferent to their needs, or stuck in unhealthy patterns can be emotionally and physically exhausting. What makes this situation even more challenging is the emotional and societal stigma that often accompanies it. Many women feel compelled to endure unhealthy relationships due to fear of judgment, especially when children, family, and society are involved. In this case, the woman was concerned about the repercussions of divorce on her children's careers and personal lives. The pressure to maintain appearances or protect loved ones from embarrassment often keeps women in these situations longer than they would otherwise stay. Even when the marriage has become toxic, the sense of duty or obligation can hold them back from taking the necessary steps toward personal freedom. The feeling of being trapped in a relationship, especially one that has become emotionally draining, can cause feelings of loneliness, frustration, and disillusionment. For women who have spent decades caring for their families, managing the home and supporting their partners, reaching a point where they no longer recognize the person they're married to, or even worse, begin to resent them, can be devastating. It can feel as though they have sacrificed their own happiness for the sake of others, only to end up feeling isolated, unheard, and exhausted. At the same time, the impact of these feelings is not just emotional. The physical toll of this constant stress can manifest in various ways, such as insomnia, physical fatigue, or even health problems triggered by the strain of living in an unhealthy environment. The woman's story, with the lack of sleep and constant exhaustion from caring for a husband who refused to address his own health issues, illustrates just how damaging an imbalanced relationship can be. In such circumstances, it's essential to seek support. The woman in this story found solace in venting with her friends who were in similar situations with their husbands. These moments of sharing frustrations and finding common ground helped her realize she wasn't alone. However, while this provided some relief, it didn't change the fact that her relationship had deteriorated to the point of resentment and emotional burnout. If you're experiencing similar feelings in your marriage, it's important to recognize that these issues are common but should not be ignored. Emotional distance, neglect, and lack of support can all lead to feelings of resentment and frustration, but these feelings can also be addressed. Communication is key in any relationship, and it's crucial to express how you feel without fear of judgment or dismissal. If your spouse refuses to listen or refuses to make changes, then it may be time to take a step back and evaluate the relationship. Sometimes, seeking professional help, whether through couples therapy or individual counseling, can be the first step toward healing and finding a path forward, either together or separately. No one should have to endure a relationship that leaves them feeling exhausted, neglected, and emotionally drained. Relationships evolve over time, and sometimes the needs and expectations of each person can shift. It's okay to ask for help, to seek support from others, and to make decisions that are in your best interest, even if those decisions are difficult. If you feel trapped in a situation where your needs are not being met, know that you're not alone. Many people go through similar struggles, and it's important to acknowledge your feelings and take steps toward a healthier, more fulfilling life. Whether that's through communication, setting boundaries, or, in some cases, making the tough decision to walk away. Your well-being matters, and your happiness deserves to be a priority. If you're still watching this video, please comment number 2 below to let me know you're still with me. Thank you for your valuable time. The story of Anne and John offers a compelling reflection of the challenges faced by many long-term couples as they grow older. It speaks to the emotional shifts, the changes in routines, and the growing sense of disconnection that often accompany the later years of marriage. While many people enter marriage with a deep sense of love and commitment, the journey of shared life can evolve in unexpected ways, leaving couples grappling with new issues that can sometimes seem insurmountable. Anne and John's story isn't just a tale about growing older together, but a reflection of how relationships need constant nurturing, especially as life circumstances change. Anne and John had been married for over 40 years. Their marriage began like many others, full of excitement, hopes, and dreams for the future. They met at a school dance, where the spark between them was immediate. Anne, a young woman with dreams of becoming a teacher, and John, an ambitious engineer, were soon inseparable. Together, they built a life, had children, and created a home filled with love and laughter. They enjoyed countless family vacations, raised 2 children, and managed to stay connected as they juggled work, family, and personal ambitions. However, as the years passed and their children grew older, the family dynamic began to shift. The house that once echoed with the sounds of their kids' laughter grew quiet as their eldest son, Jack, left for college and their youngest daughter, Emily, moved to another city for work. Anne, like many parents, struggled with the emptiness that came with this new phase in life. The bustling household that had once been filled with noise and activity now felt cold and silent. Her children were no longer around, and the home that had been a hub of family life now seemed desolate. At the same time, John entered a new phase in his own life: retirement. While Anne adjusted to the changes by trying to find new ways to fill her time, John discovered a passion for gardening. What started as a hobby gradually consumed more and more of his time. He found fulfillment in watching his flowers bloom, and he spent hours each day tending to his plants. Initially, Anne was supportive of his new interest, but as the months passed, it became apparent that gardening was taking up all of John's attention. He no longer seemed to have time for her or the home they had once shared so deeply. Anne began to feel neglected as John became increasingly absorbed in his gardening. When she tried to reach out to him, asking for help with simple household tasks like fixing a leaky faucet or tidying up the yard, John would reluctantly agree, but often forget or get distracted. His indifference to these simple requests left Anne feeling invisible. She felt like her needs, both emotional and practical, were being ignored. Yet, she didn't want to rock the boat, so she quietly endured her growing feelings of loneliness. As the emotional gap between them grew, Anne began to question the strength of their relationship. She wondered if they would ever bridge the divide that had developed between them. Could they find their way back to the love they once shared, or had their marriage reached a point of no return? Anne's heart ached as she struggled to find answers. She couldn't understand why John, who had once been so present and engaged, had become so distant and consumed by his new passion. It was in these moments of reflection that Anne began to recognize the fundamental changes in their marriage. While the early years of their relationship were marked by shared goals, dreams, and responsibilities, the later years had become more about personal pursuits. John's retirement had given him the opportunity to focus on himself and his passion for gardening, but Anne felt as though she had been left behind in the process. She was forced to contend with the growing emotional distance that seemed insurmountable. This scenario is not unique to Anne and John. Many long-term couples experience a shift in their relationship as they age. In the early years of marriage, couples are often united by common goals: building a home, raising children, achieving career milestones, and supporting each other through life's challenges. But as the children grow up and leave the nest, couples can feel like strangers to one another. With fewer responsibilities tying them together, they may struggle to maintain a meaningful connection. One of the key factors in these shifts is the evolution of self-awareness that often comes with age. As the demands of daily life, work, child rearing, and home maintenance ease, many people find themselves with more time to reflect on their lives. In Anne's case, the transition from raising children to an empty nest forced her to reconsider her relationship with John. She began to notice flaws in him that had been overlooked or dismissed during their busy years of raising children. These weren't necessarily flaws that appeared suddenly, but rather qualities that had been overshadowed by the demands of life. This realization can be difficult to process, and it can lead to feelings of frustration, resentment, and even disillusionment. As individuals grow older, they often become more self-aware of their own needs, desires, and limitations. Anne, having spent many years prioritizing her family and supporting John, was now seeking fulfillment for herself. She yearned for emotional connection and intimacy, but found that John's new passion for gardening had taken over their shared space. It wasn't just that gardening was his new hobby. It was that he had retreated into it, leaving Anne to fend for herself emotionally. The emotional distance between Anne and John didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't a simple result of John's newfound hobby. It was the culmination of years of emotional neglect, unspoken frustrations, and unmet needs. John's failure to recognize Anne's growing discontent, combined with his increasing indifference, left Anne feeling isolated. While he was content in his own world, Anne was left wondering if they could ever reconnect and restore the bond they once had. The growing emotional distance between Anne and John is not a rare occurrence. Many couples experience similar struggles as they grow older. Aging can bring physical changes that make individuals more self-conscious, while also increasing the vulnerability that comes with recognizing one's own mortality. As people become more aware of their own aging bodies, they often begin to question the choices they've made throughout their lives, including their relationships. For Anne, her reflection on her marriage became an exploration of what she had sacrificed over the years. She had put John's needs and desires above her own, and now she was feeling the consequences of that sacrifice. This is where the crucial role of communication comes into play. Couples who have been together for many years often fall into the trap of assuming that their connection is secure, that no further effort is needed. After all, they've been together for decades. But the reality is that even the strongest relationships require constant nurturing and open communication. Without it, emotional distance can creep in, and resentment can begin to build. For Anne and John, the lack of communication became a significant problem. Anne didn't feel comfortable expressing her unhappiness because she didn't want to upset John or rock the boat. Meanwhile, John remained oblivious to Anne's growing frustration, lost in his world of gardening. This lack of communication only widened the emotional gap between them. The longer they went without addressing their issues, the more difficult it became to repair the damage. However, despite these challenges, Anne and John's story offers hope. It illustrates the possibility of change, even in the later years of marriage. Many couples who face emotional disconnection and frustration in their later years can find a way back to one another through open communication and a renewed commitment to the relationship. While it may require effort and patience, it is possible to rekindle the love and connection that once brought the couple together. The key to preserving family happiness in the later years of marriage is not about finding perfection, but about understanding, empathy, and a willingness to change. As individuals grow older, they must be willing to accept the changes in themselves and their partner. Aging brings vulnerabilities, and these need to be recognized with compassion. Couples need to recognize that they are no longer the same people they were when they first married, but that doesn't mean the relationship has to suffer. Instead, it offers an opportunity to grow together in a new way. One of the most important aspects of preserving happiness in marriage is spending quality time together. As children grow up and leave home, couples are left with the chance to rediscover one another. This can be a time to explore new hobbies, travel, or simply enjoy quiet moments at home. It's about building new memories and fostering a deeper connection. Rather than clinging to the past, couples should embrace the present and find ways to reconnect. In conclusion, Anne and John's story is not just about the challenges of aging, but about the challenges of maintaining a relationship in the face of changing life circumstances. It speaks to the importance of communication, empathy, and a willingness to adapt as partners grow older. The emotional distance that developed between Anne and John wasn't inevitable, but it was the result of years of neglect, unspoken frustrations, and unmet needs. Through open communication, understanding, and a renewed commitment to one another, couples can overcome these challenges and rediscover the love that initially brought them together. Anne's heart felt heavy, as though the love she once shared with John was destined to fade away like the flowers in his beloved garden. The question weighed on her mind. Was their marriage truly over, or could it be saved? She wasn't ready to give up just yet. Like so many others, Anne and John's story was a reminder that relationships take constant effort, understanding, and a willingness to adapt to the inevitable changes that time brings. For a while, Anne had felt the emotional distance between her and John growing ever wider. In a quiet, desperate hope to rekindle the warmth of their marriage, Anne decided to prepare a special dinner for John one evening. She selected dishes she knew he loved, hoping that a thoughtful meal would create a moment where they could reconnect, share their feelings, and enjoy each other's company. But when John came home, he briefly praised the meal before retreating to his garden as if nothing had changed. His work in the garden, his passion, his escape, had now become the center of his world. He continued to pour his energy into his plants while Anne sat alone at the table. Her heart sank. She had put so much effort into creating a beautiful evening, but it felt as though her efforts had gone unnoticed, unappreciated. Anne said nothing, but deep inside, resentment began to settle in her chest like a heavy weight. As the days passed, the emotional distance between them seemed to widen. This rift in their marriage was becoming harder to ignore, and Anne's longing for a meaningful connection grew. But then, the turning point came when Anne became seriously ill. She was utterly exhausted and had to spend the entire day in bed. Hoping John would notice and offer his help, Anne felt increasingly alone. However, John continued his daily routine, going to the garden early in the morning and only coming inside occasionally for a quick drink. He was absorbed in his work, oblivious to Anne's suffering. It wasn't until the evening, as John was preparing for bed, that Anne quietly asked, "Did you notice I've been sick all day?" John was caught off guard, his surprise evident. But instead of offering comfort or expressing concern, he simply responded, "Oh, why didn't you tell me earlier?" He then continued getting ready for bed without any further thought. Anne's heart broke. The realization that John no longer seemed to care about her well-being or her feelings left her feeling utterly alone and abandoned in their marriage. Over time, the emotional void between them grew. It felt as though they were living in a marriage without any real connection. Even though they were still under the same roof, it felt as if they were two strangers leading parallel lives. Anne came to the painful conclusion that if things didn't change, she would continue to live in a state of isolation, despite being married. She knew she had to decide for her well-being and happiness. One afternoon, while taking a walk in the park near their home, Anne stumbled upon a group of women painting under the shade of a tree. They were members of a local art club, and they warmly invited her to join them. At first, Anne hesitated, unsure of herself, as it had been years since she had picked up a paintbrush. But as she watched them creating beautiful, expressive pieces of art, something stirred inside her. She realized that painting might offer her a way to express her emotions, a chance to reconnect with herself and her creativity. She decided to give it a try. As the weeks passed, painting became Anne's new passion. She found freedom in each stroke, joy in the colors, and a sense of accomplishment in every completed piece. She looked forward to the painting sessions, feeling more alive and inspired than she had in years. Every evening, she returned home from her art classes, rejuvenated, filled with new energy and a sense of purpose. But John, consumed with his gardening, remained oblivious to her transformation. He continued to focus on his plants, rarely even noticing how Anne's mood had shifted. After months of feeling unseen and neglected, Anne decided it was time to have an honest conversation with John. One evening, as they sat down to dinner, she could no longer hold her feelings inside. "Do you realize that we're growing apart?" she asked quietly. John was initially taken aback by her words, but as he looked into her eyes, he began to understand the depth of her pain. Anne continued, her voice trembling as she spoke. She reminded John of the times she had asked for his help around the house, only for him to agree and then forget because his mind was always preoccupied with his garden. She shared the memory of the day she had been so sick, hoping for his support, but instead, he had remained oblivious to her needs. Each of these moments, seemingly small to John, had gradually worn her down, leaving her feeling more isolated and unnoticed in their marriage. John listened, his guilt mounting with every word. He had never realized how his neglect, even in its smallest forms, had hurt Anne so deeply. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't realize you were feeling so alone. I've been so wrapped up in my world. I've been selfish and I never meant to make you feel this way." That conversation marked a turning point. John began to make an effort to change. He started spending more time with Anne, paying attention to her needs and listening to her more attentively. He even decided to join her in the painting class. While he wasn't particularly interested in art and had no talent for it, he recognized how important it was to Anne and wanted to be a part of her new life. He saw it as a way to reconnect, not just through the act of painting, but through sharing an experience that brought her joy. Their painting sessions became a special time for both of them. They not only created art together, but also began to rediscover the connection they had once shared. John also made an effort to plan small weekend outings, something they used to enjoy when they were younger but had long since forgotten. Together, they explored new parks, towns, and restaurants, making new memories and rekindling the spark in their marriage that had seemed lost for so long. Anne, who had once felt neglected and forgotten, now found herself feeling seen, valued, and loved again. She realized that sometimes, in order to rebuild a relationship, it's not enough to wait for change to come. One must be willing to open up, express feelings, and take the first step toward healing. John, for his part, learned to be more aware of his wife's emotional needs and to respect the things that brought her happiness. Their marriage, once on the brink of fading into quiet loneliness, was now renewed through understanding, communication, and a shared commitment to reconnect. The story of Anne and John serves as a profound testament to the incredible power of communication, empathy, and mutual understanding in a long-lasting marriage. After more than 4 decades of sharing their lives, they faced numerous challenges, but they did not shy away from them. Instead, they confronted their difficulties head-on, choosing to grow and adapt together. Through their journey, they discovered the importance of truly listening to each other, opening up their hearts and finding new ways to communicate. In doing so, they were able to rediscover the deep emotional connection that they thought they had lost over the years. Marriage, like life, is rarely without its hurdles. But for Anne and John, it was their unwavering commitment to one another, fueled by patience, love, and a willingness to understand, that allowed them to reignite the joy in their relationship. Their story is a beautiful reminder that even as the years pass, love can continue to blossom and evolve, provided both partners are willing to embrace change and grow together. Through their example, we are reminded that true love isn't about perfection, but about the shared effort to adapt, forgive, and continue nurturing the bond that brought them together. In life and marriage, it's not enough to simply celebrate the happy moments. It's equally essential to cultivate forgiveness, patience, and tolerance. especially during challenging times. Selfishness and neglect can easily erode the foundation of any relationship, but it's through empathy, active listening, and understanding that partners can build something far stronger. Let Anne and John's experience inspire us to continuously nurture our relationships, keeping love at the forefront and allowing it to grow in new and meaningful ways. May you always have the wisdom to foster love, the courage to face challenges together, and the perseverance to maintain a happy, harmonious family.